is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott here with co-host Andrew Young. We've had some awesome conversations recently with terrific guests. Most recently, we had Jack Zampolin of Strange Love, as well as Jelena Jurek of Noble, talking about building out stablecoins and driving real-world assets onto the Cosmos blockchain. And today, we're going to go back to just me and AY having a little chat about what's going on in the world today, because there's a lot of exciting stuff. In Toronto right now for Collision, which is the biggest technology conference in the world. According to the statistics, there are tens of thousands of people here from all over the world, over 1,000 journalists in a venue size, which they use this Canadian reference because it's something we understand. It's the size of 47 hockey rinks. So really exciting times going on in Toronto. The tech community has all rallied around the event, and it's happening at a kind of a propitious time in Web3 and in crypto, with so much news going on in the world. So why don't we start there, Andrew? What's new with you, man?
Well, I think I would just put it right back to you. I think the first big news of the docket is, I think, related to you. You got some personal news that you're going to be sharing this week.
Yeah, that's right. I guess I'll get started. So on Wednesday, June 28th, I announced that, I officially announced my new book is going to be coming out in September of this year. The book is called Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. The book is based obviously on my own experience in the industry, my wide reading on a range of subjects, but also over 50 interviews that I did with various, builders, thought leaders, VCs, regular people, artists, creators, storytellers who are, harnessing this new technology toolkit to change their lives, change their industry, or maybe build something entirely new. I think the time is right for a book on Web3. I think that recent events have, thrown new mud on the windshield and created a sense of urgency for something new to provide some clarity on what's going on in the world. I think the world of Web3 needs a bit of a reset, and I'm hoping that the book will do that. So it's a highly accessible book, lots of great stories, vignettes that I hope paint a really rich picture of all the exciting innovation that's going on, not just in DeFi, but in all of Web3's other frontiers, including its cultural frontiers. A couple of the people we've actually had on the show have been profiled in the book, talking about how they're using this technology. So yeah, really exciting. The book's available for pre-order now on Amazon, just a quick little plug, but otherwise just really excited to be able to talk about it, to share some of these new ideas and to build some momentum around it.
What do you think? What's your favorite chapter? Like what chapter should I just skip to right away?
Well, the book is organized into 3 sections. So there's an introductory section, which talks about, A, the big idea, and B, talks about the building blocks of Web3, how it works. And then section 2 is on transformations. So chapter 1, something near and dear to your heart and my heart and core to our podcast, it's on assets. So how do blockchains enable us to program new kinds of assets, digitally native assets that weren't possible before? The book tries to explain what tokens are and how they work, containers for value that can be programmed to represent anything of value, whether it's money or, art or collectibles, or a vote in an election, or a piece of IP, or some other asset like a security. They're really a tabula rasa for us to do anything. But really the key idea is that I want to place Web3 in the reimagining of assets in a broader historical context. So in feudal times, the most important asset in the economy was land, right? Because it was an agrarian economy. So farming, mining, logging were kind of the main industries. And the most wealthy people in the world, the most powerful people, were the ones who controlled land. The invention of industrial capitalism changed that dynamic a lot. So the new sort of titans of industry, the new aristocracy, was made up of people who owned capital, and specifically shares in companies, bonds, and other financial assets. And now we're moving to a digital economy. And so it makes sense that the native asset class for the digital age should be something that's digitally native. And so in a way, the rise of tokens fits a long historical arc from simple agrarian societies to more complex industrial economies to ones that are entirely digitally native. And then the other thing that's really interesting that I discuss in the chapter is how, in a way, at the same time, assets are becoming more democratized. In the early days, let's say the Middle Ages, the king, some landowners, the church owned most of the wealth in the economy. In the industrial age, industrial capitalists like Cornelius Vanderbilt, they owned a lot of wealth, but actually a smaller percentage of wealth compared to feudal landlords. And even today, we talk about the rise of the super wealthy. But if Elon Musk were to liquidate all of his holdings of Tesla, it would only take about one out of every $200 in the economy out of circulation, versus Vanderbilt's time, it would have taken one out of every 10. And in the King of England, it would have been one out of every 4. So we're in this period now where over time, assets and wealth have become more democratized. It's not something that is felt equally. There are a lot of people who lack access to financial services, who lack access to investment options. And that's, divided along class and racial lines as well in places like Canada and the US. But broadly speaking, the invention of capitalism and later a bunch of technology innovations have actually broadened the financial franchise a lot for a lot of people. So I actually view tokens as being part of that narrative arc as well, which is that a lot of value has been created online in Web 2, but most of that value has accrued to big platforms and not to the people who actually create that value. And the reason is that we haven't had a way to clearly express digital ownership until now. So now that we have this new toolkit at our disposal, we've got new ways for the creators of value, for internet users, to become internet owners. And that's going to change that calculus even further. So chapter 3 on assets, would highly encourage you to check that out. But that's one of 5 or 6 other that we look at, looking at transformations.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. The way you described that chapter, as well as the book, made me think of this other book, Ascent of Money by Niall Ferguson. I'm not sure if you sort of pulled from that too, but it also kind of just draws the arc of financial history and then sort of looks to the future. But it was looking to the future in a different way, more analyzing how like globalization has led to money pouring in from China into developed countries. It was more looking at like a flow of new funds instead of like a new innovative sort of financial assets. It is interesting. I guess one thing that's really interesting to me, not to kind of go off topic too much, is whether blockchain is just going to be kind of a more efficient way of doing financial assets that we already, with tokenizing financial assets and allowing transaction of assets that we already sort of know and use, or whether the big innovation will be in enabling new types of financial assets that have never been traded before, like securitized compute, for example, or like making data storage into like an actual tradable commodity. So I'm actually just kind of curious, like, do you focus a little bit on that, like in terms of like the efficiency gains of blockchain for traditional assets versus sort of sci-fi, new types of kind of sci-fi-esque financial assets like compute, data storage, people's attention, all sorts of things like that?
Yeah. Well, I want to answer the first part of your question, which is on Ferguson's book, The Ascent of Money. He actually has said a couple of thoughtful things about blockchain, crypto, and Web3 as well. And that's mostly been in response to, the high profile collapse of FTX last year. And he said, a lot of doomsayers who point to that collapse as proof of, the flaws of the underlying technology should be very, very careful. The same people 250 years ago would have been using the collapse of the South Sea bubble as a reason why the joint stock corporation is actually a bad idea, because it happened to be a company that went under and caused that financial calamity. And he also said, they would have been signing the death rights for, the public company and for the banking system, after 1929, even though it wasn't necessarily that the underlying nature of that thing was flawed. In fact, if anything, it was great. And so I think that's an interesting point to make. I also think that, they say technology tools make the world flatter. by improving access to information, maybe connecting you to new marketplaces, and that's globalization in a nutshell. Well, I think if that's true, then Web3 is going to be a steamroller. It's going to be flattening the playing field even more, creating new ways for people to earn money, to store value, and to connect into the global economy. And that's something I'm really excited about. In terms of the asset question, it's something that I wrestled with a lot because people are always talking about, securities tokens are the killer app for blockchain, that we should just use the underlying efficiencies of this technology and apply them to existing assets. I think that there's definitely a big opportunity there, but I'm very skeptical that that will be the area where the most growth or innovation occurs. And that's because, generally speaking, when you get a new paradigm, it's not onboarding the old world to the new world that creates the most value. In the 1990s and 2000s, when the internet was invented, a lot of existing services like classifieds, newspapers, magazines, radio, all moved online. And in some instances, ended up becoming really successful digital businesses, like say the New York Times, for example. But many of them did not. And in general, the most valuable internet properties that exist in the world today, the most compelling internet enterprises, are not businesses that took something that existed before and moved it online. They are companies that created something entirely new, like say cloud computing in Amazon's case, or social networking in Facebook's case, or the search engine, right, in Google. So all these different new internet capabilities that did not exist before. And I think the same is true now. I think because it's a new technology, we're always trying to figure out new kind of skeuomorphic designs for tokens, which basically means trying to adapt things that came before to this new world. So we talk about digital money and crypto collectibles or art, or we talk about securities tokens or central bank digital currencies, the most kind of skeuomorphic of them all. And I think in each of those cases, obviously there's a product market fit. I mean, NFTs have been a huge market, but I think that bigger picture, it is going to be assets we haven't even contemplated yet that are going to end up being the most disruptive, because we've got this new medium for value. We can imagine things that actually weren't possible before. So thank you for the question, because it actually is a really central theme to the chapter. And we do explore some of those examples that you've just raised of new kinds of assets that frankly weren't possible in a pre-Web3 world.
Yeah, exactly. I think that especially like the idea of like basic attention, that was like one of the things that got me really interested in crypto early on. Just the idea of paying people for their data, and essentially allowing people to monetize their data directly, or I guess in this case their attention. But yeah, I mean, there's also been a lot of news on the crypto front in general. I'm not sure if you've been following. It looks like FTX came out and said this week that they actually have $7 billion in liquid assets, as well as just a whole host of real estate properties, against total claims of about 8.7 billion.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have to look into like what constitutes that liquid $7 billion. Is it $3 billion of SRM or like other extremely illiquid tokens, or is it kind of $7 billion of stable coins and ETH? Yeah. But even still, it does go to show that the FTX hole is looking. I mean, it's looking like people are going to get at least 50 cents on the dollar back, which is way higher than what people initially thought. Like when FTX blew up, people were trading their claims on their assets for, I was seeing transactions going through at like 8 and 10 cents. So essentially people were taking 90% haircuts. Apparently the claims market right now is trading at like 35, 40 cents, which is probably, obviously a discount to fair value, just given like illiquidity of your claim.
And the time value as well.
Yeah, exactly. The time value and everything. So, yeah, I mean, it's really good to see. I mean, obviously a huge portion of this is just the crypto market's up. And so the whole of 9 billion is just like the dollar value of what those assets were back then. And then since crypto's doubled, The liquid assets has maybe gone from 3.5 to 7 just by itself.
Well, that's sort of interesting. So, is that how it works with these things where, the bankruptcy, the claim's going to be the US dollar value, I'm guessing, right? Not based on the number of, any given asset.
Yeah, I believe that's what it is. So it's a straight value, and then it's obviously great. It's actually kind of similar to how the Mt. Gox creditors, in a lot of cases, actually, they received less Bitcoin than they had on the exchange, but received a higher dollar value, just given that Bitcoin had, run up such a huge percentage.
Right.
It's just a very positive news overall. And then one other thing that's kind of interesting to see is just how many properties in Bahamas FTX had just been buying with customers' money. One of my friends who actually lives in Nassau was saying that FTX would pay way over market just to get fast closes on a lot of these things. And so they were really sort of paying through the gills on a lot of these properties. So who knows if the real estate portfolio is as valuable as it was sort of mark to market at the time. But overall, just very good news. Do you think there's anything else sort of driving the move in the markets right now? Or it seems like,
I think, sorry. I mean, I think that you're right about the FTX situation. I mean, who knows what those assets are? There are people who probably know this better than I do, but it's no secret that the claims were like the most sought after asset of all time after this thing went under. Like, every shark I knew and every smart person who is in the deep value business was like trying to get their hands on any claims that they possibly could. So we always knew there was probably something there. I think that as far as the industry goes, it would be nice if people were made whole. Obviously, it's not nice when people lose money. But I think long term, the hope is that centralized businesses like FTX come under greater oversight and with greater scrutiny from investors and vendors and partners, and that in general people rely less on intermediaries and custodial firms for their on-ramp and on-ramps kind of services, which is how I kind of think of FTX. I mean, people were there because they liked the interface and it was convenient and liquid and so forth. I think we need to see more of that get built out in the Web3 and decentralized world. Now, interestingly, as we mentioned on the last episode, the last couple of weeks has seen kind of an interesting inflection point where decentralized exchange volumes have exceeded 20%, close to 25%, in fact, which is the highest level that they ever have been relative to their centralized counterparts. So as these decentralized, peer to smart contract or, decentralized exchanges pick up in terms of size and become more sophisticated, they're going to, take away some of the share from these companies, which I think is a good thing. It's not to say there shouldn't be companies that act in this space, especially ones that, have integrity, but you don't want anything that's too big to fail, right? And I think that was the concern around, FTX and now Binance. And I think that having these things relegated to tier 2 status or to, support role or on-ramp role is probably a good thing in the long run. So I hope everybody gets made whole, but I hope this doesn't mean, we can, gamble again on some offshore exchange, because that would be unfortunate.
Yeah, there's been a lot of one thing that's been interesting to see is there's been a lot of innovation in the DeFi space over the last kind of 12 to 24 months, even with sort of a lower, a harder environment to fundraise in. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the sort of DeFi 1.0 coins have been ripping over the last 2 weeks. They've been seeing a pretty big uptick in value, along with sort of Ethereum and Bitcoin, whereas almost everything else has been relatively flat. And so it's just been interesting to see, because DeFi coins essentially have been almost like at least in a 3-year bear market relative to Ethereum's price performance, or 2.5-year bear market, somewhere around there. And they've had a pretty explosive rise off the bottom over the last couple of weeks, even as all of these new projects, for example, one of the big projects that people are excited about right now is like a cross-chain lending platform. So it's kind of like Compound or Aave, but the next generation, and lets people lend from any different EVM chain into like one pool. Or projects like Pendle, for example, which I believe allow you to trade and get leverage on LP yield, which is pretty cool to see as well. But again, something that didn't really exist as of I don't even know, like a year essentially. And we're also starting to see a lot of insurance protocols take off, allowing people to sort of get protection on their assets on an L2 or in a DeFi protocol. So it's been kind of cool to see, even as we're in, even as we're in a pretty protracted and brutal bear market. Like total TVL of DeFi is still at $40 billion, which is I think down like what 80% from the high, and pretty much equal to where we were 2.5 years ago. Yeah, I mean the new generation of projects in DeFi I think are just like much stronger than where we were even like a year or two ago.
I like to hear that, because there's often talk about what gets built in a bear market and, what helps to lead you out of a bear market. The other thing that's interesting is, I wonder do you know if there's any measure of true TVL? Because I think with that 200 billion, when it was way at the top, there's a lot of money that was like rehypothecated, basically like triple counted, double counted. And I wonder if like, because there's been a deleveraging event in the space, that the 40 bill is probably more like a true TVL, or is there still a lot of that going on? Do you know?
Yeah, so I use DeFi Llama, which I think at this point is kind of like the dominant DeFi tracking platform. I believe they actually take out, they include rehypothecated capital, but they don't include native tokens in that overall AUM. So if I create a DeFi protocol and the only asset, and say my like token for my protocol has $100 million valuation, and then there's $80 million of my own token in the protocol, they don't count that 80 million. They only count they only count external assets. Just because that was kind of a game people were playing 2 years ago to try to game TVL. I create a token with a billion units, and I sell one of them to you for $1. So now my token has $1 billion valuation, and then I go and deposit 90% of it into my DeFi protocol. Suddenly I have a $900 million TVL, and maybe people start buying the token because of the stats, just the high TVL. So crypto is pretty wild that way. There's all sorts of games people play, but I would say it's relatively intelligent in how it tracks TVL. I mean, a lot of the TVL honestly just collapsed. Like we went from kind of $140 billion in TVL to 50, which is pretty much where we are today, over the course of essentially 2 months when Terra collapsed. And so it's interesting. Like if you were to adjust TVL for token price and also strip out sort of Terra and Terra Luna, I would suspect TVL, like I guess dollar adjusted, would be way up. So like the amount of total tokens in DeFi protocols, I believe, is much higher than it was 2 years ago, even though the sort of dollar TVL value is the same.
Yeah, that's my thinking as well.
Yeah, and there's also just like
the insurance thing is interesting, because like, if for an insurance protocol to exist, I should say, for there to be a market for insurance, typically there needs to be a way to measure, calculate risk, because like otherwise, how do you price, the premiums on that insurance? And I think about a lot of things, and certain things in the DeFi space, like smart contract risk, bridge risk, like all those other things that you've talked about a lot. Who's holding the bag in that? I mean, is this just basically gambling in a way? Like it's like, I'm going to earn a premium for underwriting a policy on some protocol that, assuming it doesn't go under or get hacked, I'm going to keep making money, and it's like keep doing it until something like, and then I'm gonna unload it before it collapses, like, or is it like that's, I mean, look, lots of people speculate on insurance, like that's like the Lloyd's of London market, if you've ever heard of how that operates. It's basically like, giant syndicate. But still, I'm just curious, like, how is that actually working in practice?
Yeah, it actually is very similar to like a Lloyd's of London syndicate. Users, they essentially, people sign up to a pool, so they LP to a pool typically.
Yeah.
And then there's like each pool is writing, underwriting risk on a certain protocol. And then there's like a yield attached to that. And then typically that pool is sort of like locked up. And then the hard part is like what defines the credit event. So like how do you actually trigger payout of these claims? And so that's really tough. Typically
Oracle or something.
Yeah, so some people try to use like on-chain triggers, so that there's no Oracle, but then that often fails and can cause like essentially like technical credit events. So like trigger an insurance payout even when it's not sort of like it doesn't make sense to trigger one.
Yeah.
And then others use like almost like a governance model to determine which things to pay out and whatnot. But then you get into this tough situation where the people voting on whether the credit event happened or not are often sort of incentivized not to say that it didn't happen, because like often they're sort of on the hook in that case. So it's tough. Like, I don't know, like there's also been a rise of third-party Oracle networks to try to like take out that conflict of interest. And they almost exist as like decentralized third-party arbitration. So the big example here would be something like Yuma. And we've actually had Hart on this podcast, I think twice now, who's the founder. He's actually a Toronto guy as well, which is pretty cool. But so Yuma has sort of stepped into this role as like a third-party arbitration system. And they've seen a lot of success for both prediction markets and these kind of, I think, for these insurance protocols. But it's still very early days, and there's a lot of what you would call maybe malicious behavior happening, I think, to try to like get payouts where you shouldn't or influence whether things get paid out. So I think we're still pretty far away from insurance protocols really, really taking off, just because the mechanism for determining whether they should pay out or not is still sort of it's not 100%, put it that way.
Do you remember the case of the guy who hacked a bridge or did something? I can't remember what it was. And he was like, I didn't do anything illegal. I was just like, this is a protocol.
Yeah.
Exploiting a loophole.
That's Mango.
And the government of Puerto Rico felt otherwise, or the federal government of the US, I can't remember who it was. And like, he was like, no, that's actually what you did was like illegal. And so I just had this idea, which is like, what if someone were to buy tons of insurance on some protocol and then exploit it, but not steal any money, instead be like a white knight, or whatever they're called, like a white hat hacker, where basically it's like, hey, I did this to reveal that there's an exploitable hole in your code base. Take the money back and I hope you fix it, or something like that. And so like, they're not committing any crime there, but they're actually going to get paid massively on the insurance that they own, because they'll collect on the insurance by triggering the default event. You know what I mean? So that's a way to like hack a protocol and get paid out without actually, I don't think, doing anything illegal. And maybe in a way helping the whole system out, because anyone who sells insurance on something is taking that risk knowingly, and then the protocol doesn't, the people who are like locking their funds in for whatever reason aren't actually losing out. Has anyone raised that, or did I just come up with something original?
So, what's interesting is that actual exact scenario happened, I shouldn't say exact, but very similar scenario happened in traditional credit default swap markets. Where,
of course,
so it's actually a hedge fund effectively provided financing to a company, conditional on them declaring bankruptcy to trigger a technical default, which would then pay out the massive CDS positions that the same hedge fund had taken out.
Who was
so
that? Was that
I'm actually looking for, I'm looking at it right now. It looks like it was GSO Capital, which is a sort of like a subsidiary hedge fund of Blackstone. And essentially what they did, they bought credit default swaps tied to a distressed company. And then and what they did is they proposed a deal to company management and said, we'll refinance your debt if you agree to skip an interest payment, which triggers a technical default and therefore pays out the CDS.
Did they get away with that?
And yeah, they did it with Hovnanian Enterprises, Hove, which was like it wasn't even that distressed of a home buyer. And they actually did it with only $26 million of debt. And so the home builder, missed out on only $1 million payment of interest. And that triggered, it doesn't actually say what the position on the CDS is, but it was quite a large position, at least relative to that sort of minuscule position that they had. And it kind of tanked the whole CDS market actually, because helped tank it because
this isn't during the housing crisis, is it? Or
no, I think this was it looks like it was about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, 2018. It kind of so the firm that was on the other side of the CDS positions sued them and essentially claimed that they were engaging in like a fraudulent and manipulative scheme. I actually don't know what the end result was. I think it did get unwound, but I'd have to check it to see, because it was a total perversion of what a CDS is supposed to actually be. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so having essentially third-party insurance protocols, like enabling third parties to speculate on insurance outcomes is sort of like, even in the traditional markets, has a lot of issues with the quote unquote oracle problem of like determining what actually is an event or not.
This is so funny. I mean, we could talk about this a lot because like if you actually read histories of like the Lloyd's of London, like how it came about. So the insurance market came about to underwrite voyages of like ships overseas, and those voyages were known to be very, very hazardous and perilous voyages. And so, in order to finance them, they needed to be insured. And that's how the sort of modern insurance market came into being. And it happened in coffee shops where people would get together and they would put in, it was oftentimes like adventurers and gamblers who would put in not more than they could lose. And, if the ship made it back, they would be rewarded very handsomely. And oftentimes there were these oracle events that also occurred. Like, well, there was like the ship went missing. Was it a shipwreck? We don't know. Should we pay it out? Like, who can confirm it? Like, what is the source of information? And it just reminds me of like, the oracle problem of, okay, there was a default event. Well, how do we calculate it? Is it something that's based on chain or off chain and so forth? And it's just like, I don't know. I'm always finding these historical parallels to, early markets, like real, like frontier markets, like, the age of exploration was like as frontier as it gets. And, you see these parallels occurring in this area as well. And it's like, what's old is new, but with a little different spin. Okay, that's a good place to end it. Andrew, this has been a great chat. Actually the topic of insurance is something that I cover in the book, incidentally, as one of the transformations to financial services. I think, look, like there are peer-to-peer models for storing and moving value. There are now peer-to-peer models for lending value and exchanging assets. And there will be peer-to-peer models for, insuring against catastrophic risk. And now we're seeing the rise of that, which is really interesting. So maybe we'll bring one of these people who's launched one of these protocols on the show to talk about this in more depth. We should talk offline and see if we can come up with a great person to actually explain this in more detail. But until next week, that's it for this week's episode of DeFi Decoded. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you all next week. Take care. Bye.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized. or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.